Welcome back to the Red Path. Today I'm doing a video talking about player optimized terrain. Going to have a chat with Mark Whittaker. We're going to go over the ins and outs of that. Just a brief warning, testing another new intro video right now, and I do want to forewarn you that it may have issues with those with photosensitive epilepsy or anything similar to that. Lots of flash and light type things, so just be aware. Lasts approximately 20 seconds. So just go ahead and skip forward if you don't want to see that. But otherwise, enjoy the rest of the video. Welcome back to Red Path, everyone. I am here today joined by Mr. Mark Whittaker. How are you doing, Mark?
Welcome. I am fantastic.
Good to hear, good to hear. We're going to have a little chat about player-optimized terrain, not marijuana, just in case whatever inevitable thumbnail I use to lure you in has you thinking we're just sitting here getting high. That is not happening. We do not advocate that on this channel. But no, we're going to talk about player optimized terrain and how to use it, what it is, because I've never used it before certainly in a real life game. We just had a little mess around just so we could get used to the mechanics of using it on TTS. But it's still new to me. I know Mark's used it a few times and he's going to talk to us about that here in a moment. So just broad strokes, player optimized terrain or player placed terrain, depending on who calls it what where, is where at the start of the game you place your own terrain in your part of the battlefield before deploying your army. So it's kind of controversial, and I know, Mark, you have some kind of strong feelings, or you certainly did have some strong feelings on player optimized terrain. Why don't you tell us about those feelings?
Sure. So, look, I play World Eaters. I have strong feelings and no other kinds of feelings because all the weak feelings have been burned from my soul.
Exactly.
No, seriously. I have a couple feelings. I used to play. Well, I've been playing forever back. You know, as I tell people in the late 20th century, I was playing, and when we started at grand tournaments back then, the games were using player-placed terrain. You showed up. You placed terrain all over the battlefield, not just in your half, but you and your opponent kind of cooperatively placed terrain and built a battlefield.
Right.
That went the way of the dodo because what they found is that placing terrain is a skill. And if you don't have it, you're already starting the game at a disadvantage. And it's not something that everyone is necessarily good at or puts the same amount of thought into. And so they moved to tournament organizer placed terrain, and you showed up at the tables and the tournament organizers would try and create fair tables. This then morphed into basically what I call speed paintball tables, where the tables are relatively boring because they're exactly the same on both sides, because that's quote unquote fair, except being a defender is supposed to have some advantages, being that you get to choose which side of the table you want. Well, if everything is fair, then all you're really getting as the defender is the opportunity to place a unit first, which puts you at a disadvantage, not necessarily at an advantage. So I think that kind of annoyed some people a little bit. And so they went back and I think with good intentions went for player optimized terrain, but they made a couple choices that I think are really weird. One, you only deploy terrain on the side of the board that you know is going to be yours, which means theoretically the terrain, if you're giving thought to it, is going to be exactly where you want it every single time. If you play, for example, Tau, you're always going to have fire lines to the opponent's objectives, because I, for example, can't put anything over here on your side of the board that blocks your line of fire into my half of the board. So those fire lanes get to be there every single game, just right where you want them. If you have out of line of sight shooting, you always have cover that blocks line of sight to your out of line of sight shooting units exactly where you want it. You never have to make difficult tactical choices unless you're not skilled at placing your terrain, in which case you are immediately at a disadvantage. So I think it's really not great for new players.
Yeah.
But for people who are really into the whole play of the game, it adds another skill that they can try to master as they're playing.
Yeah. I think terrain is something that it's very difficult to balance. I mean, you've got a whole logistics situation with it. You have skill level. You have certain armies benefit from one style or another. I don't know what the perfect answer is, because you do want a fair, balanced game. But yes, there should be some agency for sure with like being the defender, picking your side. When was the last time? Out of the last 100 games of 8th or 9th, anyone who's watching this has played, where someone actually chose the other side of the table. Like, I'm sure it has happened, but it's not very often. I don't think I've ever done it. I've never played on a battlefield where there was a significant advantage or disadvantage, because they're generally very balanced. But that is why we are here discussing player optimized, because at the ACO here in a couple of weeks' time, we will be using it. And I want as much practice and as much heads-up knowledge as I can get, and hopefully this can serve as a little bit of a guide, a little bit of advice for anyone interested in this kind of thing. Whether you want to do it or not, if you're going to go to a super major here in the US, you're probably going to be using player optimized. It's maybe not so popular at like the GT level and things like that, but it is what it is, and we've got to deal with it one way or the other. So that's kind of our intro to it. What player optimized terrain appears to me as a novice approaching this mechanic, this part of the game, you want to be looking at, and we're going to demonstrate this and then we're going to review it afterwards. But you're going to want to be looking at how placing the terrain benefits your army, how it negatively impacts your opponent's army, how it works with scoring primaries and secondaries and the new tertiaries, whatever the hell you call them. There's a lot of things you have to consider on each piece of terrain you place. And yeah, it's a lot. It's daunting. Like, I mean, I've got a hard enough time prepping, just trying to remember some of the key stratagems and psychic powers I'm likely going to be facing, against the bug menace here in a couple of weeks. And now, as you said earlier, Mark, it's a whole new level of skill that you have to understand and get used to, which may not be here for, the next chapter approved or the one after that, because GW in their infinite wisdom may choose to determine what competitive terrain is going to look like. There's been feelers out there with their open series terrain layouts, which at first I liked, now I'm less of a fan of. But hopefully it was just an alpha test or a beta test, and they actually have more options available. I don't digress, because I could very much go into the politics and Machiavellian scheming of terrain options for hours. But no, we're going to get ready to dive into it. So why don't you walk us through briefly the actual, you walk up to the table, you sit your army down, you shake your opponent's hand. What is the phasing here, the sequencing of actual player placed terrain at ACO? What am I looking at here?
Yeah, so step number one, and this is both super good and a nice way to start the game off politely, is each of the tables has a different set of terrain. Each piece of terrain on those tables therefore has different characteristics to it. So what I would highly recommend is either, phones die, so don't do it. Print off the terrain rules that are in the ACO or BAO or Lone Star Open, whichever pack you're going to. Print the terrain rules at least and bring them with you. Mm-hmm. Because what you should do with your opponent first is sit down and say, okay, which table are we playing on? So which rules do we need to use for our terrain? So for example, here we have a couple of big ruins, a small ruin, a forest, which may or may not count as obscuring depending on which table you're playing on, unless they've cleaned that up a little bit.
Some of them have both light cover and dense cover, some of the forests.
Correct. And some of them also have obscuring.
Yeah, really?
Yep.
Oh, I didn't notice that.
Unless they've cleaned it up.
Okay.
There were some boards where that was the case because they didn't have enough tall terrain that was obscuring. But again, like I said, just check it. Don't make assumptions because your opponent may know what the terrain does because they played on that table last time.
Yeah.
And then, we've got some containers here that are basically just obstacles, which do be careful again because they may say that they're obscuring. They may not. There may be a discussion like this right now has 3 stacked crates. One of the conversations you may want to have with your opponent is, can I put these 3 crates in a straight line of 3 crates? Can I make 1 crate 3 crates high? How are we dealing with these crates? Do they need to be in an L shape? Can they be in a triangle shape? All of those things are both good pieces of information, but it's actually good etiquette to have a conversation with your opponent to find out, so you don't have gotcha moments.
Yes, absolutely.
When you're playing. The other side of it is to make sure you don't get a gotcha moment when you think a piece of terrain behaves a certain way and your opponent thinks otherwise, but isn't in the mood to have a conversation with you about it and just goes, I'll just do this thing. The other thing that can happen when you're at a tournament is terrain gets moved around.
Yeah.
So when you're looking at it, you're like, we have 3 ruins. You have 3 ruins. This doesn't look right. So, yep, you should have 2 big ruins. I should have 1 big ruin or 2 big ruins and a small ruin as well. So get that sorted out.
Yeah.
That's the first thing that should happen is make sure you know which pieces of the table are yours. There are some cases where there's a big piece of terrain that has to live in the middle of the board.
Yes.
Make sure it's there. And make sure you're aware of what the rules are for that piece of terrain. Sometimes it has to be directly in the middle of the table. Sometimes it has to be on the center line of the table, as close to the middle of the table as possible. Who gets to place it? All of those things you should figure out as you're getting started with your game. And then the other thing is in player optimized terrain, you get big pieces like these ruins. Usually it's anything that a knight or other large vehicle can't move through under any circumstances. Those pieces of terrain need to be 6 inches away from other pieces of terrain with that same asterisk next to it. And they always have to be 4 inches away from the table edge.
Okay. And now everything has to be 4 inches away from the edge, correct?
Correct.
Okay,
Yep.
right.
Yep. And then the last thing to keep in mind and why it's super helpful to practice is when you have a pool of terrain on your side of the board, you have to place every piece of terrain on the table. So while it may seem cool to take your first 2 big pieces of terrain and kind of block out the middle of the board, that may make it actually impossible for other pieces of terrain to fit on the board. So you can't do that either. There's not an option. You can actually be carded if you try to hide the terrain from the judges, for example. So just be careful of that. And if you get to a point where a piece doesn't fit, work with your opponent to scooch pieces around until it does fit. Don't call a judge, because the judges will be like, okay, well, this building goes here. This building is going to turn this way and go over here. And now you should have absolutely no problem fitting the rest of the terrain on the table.
Love it. Yes.
So
we don't want that.
It's kind of like calling your mom over when you and your brother are having an argument. Just don't do it. Mom's not going to be happy about it, and you're going to end up
everyone's
both
ears get clipped. So
that's right.
Yeah. So correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe in the order of operations, you pre-game, you're picking your secondaries, you're going over your warlord traits and stuff. Once you roll for attack or defender, the defender will place the first piece of terrain on the table, right?
Correct.
And there, I noticed in the BAO packet, and I remember reading the LVO one a few months ago, there are a couple of tables, and you just mentioned this, where there is a large piece of terrain which must go in the middle, and if you are the defender, you will have to place that first and potentially slide it left or right. So yeah, definitely be aware of that. So if you're the defender, whether you pick to be or you are told you are defending, you will be placing the first piece of terrain. So it seems like there's straight away a tactical decision. If if you rock up to the Orc table, for instance, which is one I do know has that fixed piece of terrain in the middle, you certainly, in my opinion, depending on some variables which are always going to throw up any rule into being incorrect, make your opponent the defender, because they have to place their first piece of terrain in the middle. Am I reading that right?
Well, so it has pluses and minuses, and again, this is why I was saying it's kind of its own little mini game.
Mm-hmm.
If your opponent is largely a shooty army, you're going to want to know where they think they're going to set up their fire base, because the first thing that they're going to do almost every time is be like, oh, all right, well, I want to be able to shoot from here and cover I want to be able to create a fire lane from here over to here and from here down to here.
Right.
So they're going to put they want to put a piece of terrain down, and you want to know which side they're going to overload. So maybe you make them the defender.
Right.
If you're both playing assault-oriented armies, then you might be a little bit more correct, because you want to be able to set up, where are you going to launch your attack from first, and make sure your opponent doesn't block that out. So forcing them to place that piece that doesn't really give them any options is helpful. So I would say depending on your style of play, which for us being world leaders is go get them.
Mm-hmm.
We don't necessarily
sometimes.
Always listen to the nails.
Yes.
No, but at the bare minimum, we don't care about that middle piece of terrain, and we want to at least get to make sure that we're setting up our launch points and our next points as quickly as possible. If our first piece of terrain is that piece in the middle, then we're kind of ceding some of that battlefield initiative already to the opponent. So I would agree. It can be very helpful to make them deploy first.
Yeah. I think, obviously we are looking at this from a very combat biased perspective when we get into our kind of mock deployment here in a few minutes. I think some of the things people watching need to consider. Your terrain for a combat army, and I can't offer much advice for shooting armies just because I don't play them, certainly not to Tau levels of shootiness. The terrain is something for you to use and leverage to your advantage, whether it's making sure a piece of terrain is in a easily movable position on turn one, or that your warp talons, for instance, are benefiting from obscuring, or that there is light cover on an objective for your cultists that are just going to sit there and do the mission specific action every round. Whatever it is, you need to consider what units in your army are going to do what in the game, and typically your units have a specific role, and it's more or less the same. If you're running World Eaters Warp Talons, you're probably 99% of the time frenzying them, and they are going down the board and they are killing something turn one. They're getting killed in return, but for them, you may want to think, depending on the layout, where can I put a piece of terrain that is going to provide them obscuring, so they can charge through cover and not take Overwatch if you're going into Tau, for instance.
Yep.
That's obviously going to be dependent on the actual map and where you can place terrain, and things like scout deployments and stuff like that. But you need to think about all these pieces. What job are they going to do for your army? And in reverse, how are they going to make it harder for your opponent to do what they necessarily want to do? Whether that's making sure your units get to set to defend if they're countercharged, or like I said, providing the obscuring. So I think we can go ahead and jump into a bit of a mock deployment here. You reckon, Mark?
Yep.
Okay, so with that in mind, obviously we know what's going on, but we've just walked up to this table. We've been through our army lists. I mean, obviously, over on my side here is what is going to win the ACO, but over on Mark's side here is what comes second at the ACO.
Eighth.
Of course. Oh,
aim for eighth.
Sorry, yes.
If you can't win, aim for eighth.
Yeah, right. So, as you said, bit of table etiquette, come up, we've shook hands, we've yelled blood for the blood god, skulls for the skull throne, etc., etc. And we're going to go through our terrain here. So we're making sure, I've got one large L, 2 large L's and a small L, my stack of containers, and my forest. And it looks like you've got exactly the same. Yep.
Yes, sir.
And we go over, so these pieces are all obscuring. This is dense. This is a scalable exposed position obstacle with light cover. So we know we're happy, and I think we're in agreement. Except it seems this one piece of terrain won't move for me. And
is it locked?
No, there we go. There's one position. There we go. We got it. Okay. So at this point, we've gone through our pre-game stuff, and we're ready to roll for attack and defender, right?
Yes, sir.
All right. Well, let's do that. Let's just go ahead. Let's jump in. I'm going to be a gentleman and roll first here.
As long as you roll low.
I did. I got a 2.
Haha! You can't roll lower than me.
Okay. So
your choice.
In this case, so this is mission 11. I'm just bringing up my completely official codex on my screen here. So we're playing Recover the Relics here. This is a hold 1, hold 2. You want to kill your opponent, so this is perfect for a World Eaters match.
Yes.
So yeah, I am going to actually have Mark be the defender and deploy first.
All right.
So yeah, do it. Go for it. And just for everyone watching, we've already agreed to this. We are going to place our piece of terrain as though this was a competitive game, and then after the fact, we'll actually discuss what our reasonings were. To that end, did you pick this?
Yep.
This part, because this is a hammer and anvil one, so.
Correct. Yep.
Okay.
And let me make sure I know where the midline is.
Oh yeah, I can't put table quarters on this one.
There we go. All right, we're okay there.
Something like that.
Yep. So we'll just bring him up a little bit. Actually, I like him where he was. Just make sure he's 4 inches away from this side of the table edge. He is so not. So this is one of those cases where it's like, see, it doesn't fit where you want it. Boop. And you cannot place them on the actual objective, so it has to slide a little bit more over. And will not fit. So, see, now you can tell we clearly did not plan this.
No, this is completely...
Totally placed the wrong piece of terrain first. And now we'll pull him up here. Doop. All right, that should fit a little bit better.
All right. My red line here is about 1 inch
almost
long, so...
All right, so there we go. There's my first piece.
All right. So, that's interesting. So I should have been thinking about that instead of drawing lines, but that's what happens. And I believe, unless the rules have changed, you get 10 minutes before the true clock starts to do this, right? At FLG
Correct.
events? Okay.
Correct. But mind you, sometimes that gets a little bit tricky because you're talking through your army, you're saying hello, your opponent had to use the restroom.
Mm-hmm.
But again, why practicing helps, right, is don't give yourself any extra stress you don't need.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, there's me.
All right. Take this big boy.
This battle map is very disconcerting for me.
You don't like the winter?
No, I like the winter, but it's like it's got a real nice 3D effect. So I keep thinking that I've got the high ground over here, and
all right, Anakin.
Yeah, all right. No, I'm Obi-Wan in this situation because I do have the
That's
high ground.
fine. You can be the lousy good guy. All right, we're gonna drop him right there.
All right, okay. And I just want to make sure this kind of like line here, that is our, should be what, 18 from there? Yeah, that is our deployment zone. Okay. Okay, so we're definitely too close there. That's fine. So we are our 6 there. I just want to check. I think it's kind of a lock into the wrong point, but yeah, we're outside of 6.
You're fine.
Yeah, I'm okay with that. That's fine. So I'm going to
like
that one. Yep. Oh, whoa. Okay, it's fine. I've flipped the table again, Mark. I'm sorry.
Oh, this is why we cannot. Literally, why we cannot have nice things.
All right. Well, I'll just throw that table away. There was 2 copies of it, so.
See? It's a bonus copy.
Yeah. I want to say it was something like that. Yeah, that's fine. Right. Okay.
Are you even trying if you don't flip the table at this point? I find myself making the sound effects in game at the tournaments too. I don't know if my opponents are usually amused by it, but I cannot stop making noises. He needs to move up. That should be okay. Yep. And we're good there. And we should certainly be good there. Okay.
Okay. Where's my... This is my big one.
This will be one of those times I'm not making a comment.
I have no idea what you're talking about.
That's unfortunate.
Something like that. And then make sure. Yep, 4 inches from the edge. Okay, let's just make sure. Should definitely. Yep, I'll have them. Oh! I haven't even
wrecking ball.
Yeah. I did say we were doing pots, so you know.
That's right.
Okay. All right. I'll lock it and I'll just make sure. But yep, I'm down there as long as I'm legal. Yeah, close enough for this.
Pretty good now.
Those ones, yeah, they don't have an asterisk, do they? So.
Nope, so they're going to end up 4 inches away from each other, so that one's good there.
And let's see. Obviously, this is a lot easier on a real table, but we're going to say
and you know, close enough for government work is close enough for government work in the land of all things.
I mean,
I think that one's
just
good.
so we don't sit here for 3 hours.
The first lesson learned about player optimized terrain is it's not as easy as it looks.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll drop him over here.
That should, yep, I've got mine.
Yep, like it.
Okay. So, come on, pick up. No, don't press the red button. That's probably what we do not want to do. There you are. Just had to find that sweet spot. Okay. So, I think he's going to be too awkward over here. That's probably...
Looks good.
Well, I think maybe. Right, yeah, 4.1 there.
Good enough.
4.1, hopefully.
Oh, perfect.
Man, okay,
almost.
So,
yep.
Yeah.
So what I would do if we were at the ACO is I would probably tell you to move this ruin one or 2 inches this way, and then you have the 2 inches to move this forest over.
So we'll go ahead and do that.
And that's part of that whole working with your opponent, because what you don't want to do is you don't want to actually eat into your playtime setting up the table. And is what was one of the reasons I was saying that I can find it difficult to really endorse player optimized terrain, because you can get totally wrecked from your gameplay just trying to set the table up, and that's not fun.
Yeah. Okay, so we are both fully deployed. Yes, we're both fully deployed with that. All right. Well, talk me through where was your first placement? It was
that was this guy over here.
All right. What was your philosophy there?
Yep. So first thing I'm looking at when I'm placing terrain is where am I going, and I need to get here to this objective.
Yeah.
So what I want to be able to do is, one, I'm expecting to push big up the middle of the table. Mm-hmm. So I need to move units along the flanks. So I need cover for my rhinos here and here. So my first building was put a ruin on this objective, so I can, if I get blasted out of my rhino, get into the cover, hold that objective, and at least do something with that unit.
Yeah.
And if it works out well, then my rhino that is deployed here advances up to there. You can't shoot at it for the first turn because it's behind obscuring, unless you want to deploy over here in the corner.
Right.
And that's okay, because if you deploy in that corner to shoot at me, you have your own building and all the rest of this obscuring terrain stopping that unit from shooting anything else for the rest of the game.
Okay.
The other important part is these buildings that we have windows on one side and walls on the other. So I made sure I turned the piece of terrain so that I had the solid wall, so you couldn't shoot the unit in the ruins if you wanted to.
Okay. Yeah, makes perfect sense to me. So in counter to that, I put down my obstacles here. Maybe it wasn't the best idea, but I kind of stand with it. So the reason for that is obviously this is tuned for this because I know exactly what Mark's army can do. Whether he does do it is another story, but I know full well what happens when a bunch of warp talons come up in your face. I don't like it, and no one else does. So knowing that there is one of these flanks, because of the placement of the objectives here, it would be very possible and likely for Mark to dedicate an apoplectic frenzy on one of his warp talon squads to shoot straight down the flank and flip whatever I've got holding these objectives by just murdering it. So I wanted to give a little bit of light cover, and although it's not obscuring, it's a true line of sight blocking for my cultists or something here, so I can just tow in a unit back here, give the longest charge range. This isn't breachable, so my his warp talons would have to move up and over and things like that in the charge phase, or depending on how I position my models, he's going to have to come down the flank or whatever. I just wanted to create a problem for whatever Mark does here, and also I knew that he couldn't deploy anything further forwards because you're about 3 inches from the centre line there, something like that. That would leave a big open space, which potentially is where I'm going to want to bring my drills in. Because typically my drills go into deep strike. I like having a place where I can actually deploy them either in my deployment zone, my half of the table, or in the centre field, because everyone always expects that they're going to come up in the back corner, because I normally take RND, so I think, he's going to bring up the drill in the back corner, I've got to screen it back there. So you waste resources, leaves gaps in the middle for me, and then I just bring them up where I wanted to anyway, so my berserkers can get out and flip this objective in round 3. So that was my philosophy for this one. So and
also, if I may say so, brilliant move there. Your veteran move with the containers
completely
is
accidental.
you left this little gap right there.
Oh, that was intentional.
where you can put a guy that has OBSEC on that objective and hold it without being able to get shot.
Yeah.
I almost did as cool of a thing. I think it's going to be really close and it would be arguable. But if you look at this ruin, I kind of put that ruin very close to where you could be on the outside of that ruin where I can't shoot you and in that objective. Not a smart play by me. I should have scooched it so there was no argument, and you could not be on that objective without either being in the open or being in the ruin and in an open side of the ruin where I can shoot you.
Yeah.
So I should have definitely moved that ruin out. So already score is 1-0, Jamie.
Well, let's see how that holds up. Where did your second piece go?
Because you placed these containers over here, that let me put this ruin, and I think a pretty commanding spot over here on this side. I kind of expected you to respond with something over on this objective.
Oh, yeah. I know you did. I know.
But
mind games have already begun, Mark. It's already started.
Well, but I was quite happy with that because if I can get two good, strong forward positions, both with the walls facing forward, I can use this area over here as my drop-off spot for my push into your side of the board. If I get first turn, great. The Warp Talons move up into this ruin here and then launch into the middle of the table. If I don't get the first turn, it's still kind of okay because they can either live behind this ruin all along this line where you have no line of shot to them at all and still threaten this objective, which still gives me 1, 2, and 3 very good solid objectives for a stranglehold or trying to hold more or trying to force you to fight into me. So I went right up to the line with that one, and also hopefully allows for more of my stuff to push up. And it's kind of teaches me that what I want to do in this game, and which you're happy with it, if given that your talk about the drills, is I'm looking now at splitting the board with these being my objectives, these being your objectives, and us fighting over this one.
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah, I can. Yeah, it makes sense. But like I said, it was all part of the plan because I'm not.
I'm playing right into your plan.
Yes, I actually am an agent of Zinch.
You're fired out of a demolisher cannon.
Oh god! Right, so that was also it honestly was a thought in my head. So I knew the obvious play once you placed your first piece was to mirror you over here, or command my right flank. But I also knew that you would most certainly and most sensibly do more or less exactly what you did and come forwards. I'm okay with that because as you're well aware, I like to frenzy my Terminators up into a forward position or give them a launching point. So I'm like, okay, we'll just throw a cheap piece down over here. Hopefully Mark will do something like he did, because as much as that's a defense for you, me being able to place this, what was it, about 6 inches away? Almost 7 inches away in the end, after the adjustments and everything. So for those watching at home, our deployment line is right about here. Something here, about an inch behind this piece of terrain. So here's my philosophy here. Let me grab my Terminators. This is something I generally like to do. These boys deploy eventually here, and they're going to get frenzied. They're not going to need to go their full 9 because they're just going to end up something like this. Depending on what Mark has put on this side, if he's got his squad of 10 Warp Talons here, I'm probably going to be, 1.1 inches away just to make his charge harder. See, this is my play here. I take this objective against anything but OBSEC, and on my movement phase, okay, if we could move, depending on how aggressive my opponent is, I've got a decent charge over here. If you've pre-game moved something up in there, thinking you're nice and safe. Of course, you could also be 1.1 inches away, or what have you. But for me, having this there actually helps me by having a shorter no man's land. So I only have 1 turn of movement and 1 charge phase to get across it.
He's clever, this one.
Trying. Rather than, typically, because if you were playing Tau, this ruin is going to be probably, all the way back.
Oh, yeah.
And then
Definitely.
I've got my 5 here, I've got my 5 here. No Terminators doing a damn thing in that game. So, but yeah.
Well, I would honestly, if you're playing against Tau, I would think deep strike them.
Yes, yeah.
At least maybe you'll get a turn out of them then.
Yeah, for sure, yeah. And also against Tau, my ruins are more or less as many of them as possible were touching my, the centre field here, and giving me leapfrog positions and everything else. But yeah, so that was the philosophy behind my second bit of letting you do my work for me. So where did you go?
So my third drop was the other large ruin here, which I didn't think it gave too much away, but it does. One of the things that I struggle with doing is not letting my opponent shoot my Vindicators on the first turn. I have a tendency to put terrain not in the best places, so I put a nice wall along the front here of this ruins, so that if I bring over a Vindicator, I can just plunk it down, turn it around, and hide it from your shooting. And then if I go, it pops out, it moves up a little bit if it needs to, and then it's got decent line of fire. So that was where that was going.
Okay. And yeah, and like as I think my next piece was, I want to say it was this large piece here. It kind of felt wasted, and I'm sure anyone who was watching was like, well, why the hell are you doing that? Because for me, I didn't need, like, the centre of the field, apart from the obstacles in the middle here, the stage was already set. For me, this is somewhere where my disciples and apostle, that's Mark's army, don't want to steal his things, these boys here sit something right like that, perfectly obscured, holding that objective, depending on what else I may want them to do, and what mark deep strikes and things like that. My apostles probably go in something like this. I think it's 2 inches for prayer buff, and then he's 6 inches away here from the Terminators, because they're going to be a target of the Benediction of Darkness. So it just gives me not much utility, but it's protecting these. Yeah, it's doing what I need it to do, because in this battle, like Mark's plan, like you said, was to come down on this flank and attack me here and kind of trade over here. We know we're having a big dust up somewhere in the middle of the table. There may be threats on the backfield with deep strikes and tides of traitors and things. That's fine. The terrain does what I need it to do, give some protection to my disciples. So that's why that guy kind of went there.
Yep. And so when you placed back there, this forest wasn't here yet. Right. I was still thinking super happy, because originally I have a small, you have the 2 10 blocks of Warp Talons, I have a 10 and a 5. I was thinking the 10 are going to head this way and the 5 are going to head this way, but without something pushing me back off the front line here, I dropped in this pile of containers in the middle here for 2 reasons. One, it does create a block of fire from over here to this way, but more importantly, it allows me to take that 5 unit of Warp Talons and start them here and potentially move them up into here with the pregame move, and they'll be out of line of sight because they're shorter than this piece of terrain, and that gives me a bigger jump point. I can go this way, I can go this way. I don't have to just come down this flank with that 5 pack of Warp Talons. They can sit in the middle and be kind of a harassing unit on whatever goes wherever you put it, was my thought with that one.
That is actually on this map, or on this mission with the kind of the 4 objectives here. Having that central staging point is actually, it's a really good advantage for Warp Talons, because you're to get on the objective, you're just a movement phase, which means you've got an easy charge onto anything on the objective. So that's actually I need to remember that one for this mission, because that's almost perfect positioning for Warp, for your small squad of Warp Talons, certainly.
Correct.
Because once you get to 8 models, you may actually have trouble hiding them all. But
Correct.
5 are sitting there perfectly.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay, that's a really good play. I like that one.
One for me. It's even again.
Yes. Okay. There we go. I think then I dropped my other large ruin. This one, honestly, was just a case of, well, I ain't got nowhere else to put it. It's going to uninteract with the game, and that is kind of sacrificing a resource. But I don't feel bad about it. Now, obviously, if we were to play this game out and I get absolutely, get my ass handed to me, then I consider it. But, like I've said, in my head, the game is already playing out over these 4 objectives. I've done what I wanted to do here on this objective, and I've done what I wanted to do here. I think Mark has the better position, certainly here, with his Warp Talons just able to come out and do exactly what they're going to do. But I had nowhere to really put this, so I think really that scrubs a point from me, and it's now 1-0 to you. Because it's a wasted resource. But
the only suggestion I would have for that one is maybe instead of placing this smallest ruin first, if you put one of the large ruins there, would it do the same thing you wanted that smaller ruin to do, or would it get in your way too much?
Oh, yeah, it probably would have been actually the better choice, to be honest. Looking at them now, just because of the real estate for making sure all my Terminators could get on there, get light cover, get defensible, and be an inch away from the wall.
And that is an important thing to think about too, is that for a unit to take advantage of defensive, it all has to be in the cover.
Yes, every model, yeah. So yeah, okay, so all right, well look, I've already taken a point away from myself. I'm not making that -1. So
darn it. Well, that's true. You can't go -1 anyway.
We can't, so that's in the core rule book.
So my last drop was this forest back here. A lot of times this gets me in trouble because I'll want to put a Vindicator in there just so I'm like, it's got -1 to hit, it'll be safe. No, it's not. It's not anymore. Everything ignores it. But I put it there anyway. One, because it was either this corner or this corner. I have units that are in a building that can shoot out through the windows into this side. I have units in this building that can shoot back into this side. I'm going to want to be pushing up the left flank. So what I need to do is have something to anchor me down in this area over here. I can drop one Vindicator in there and either you shoot at it or it can push units away out to this corner if they deep strike in somehow. And it just makes a nuisance of itself because the -1 for armies that care does matter.
Yes.
And if there's a Vindicator sitting like right here, even with only its 24 inches of range, it still hits this building, potentially hits units on here, can reach out over this way to people trying to threaten this objective. So it's not being too crippled by its short range, but it does have some ability to provide some punch over in that corner.
Yeah. So look, it is currently 1-0 to you. I'm about to score the hat trick though.
Uh-oh.
This is it, okay? So, no. This is literally about the only spot the forest could go. But it also was where I envisioned putting the forest. And the reason for that is it's kind of actually very similar to yours. With this being difficult ground and dense and whatever else it's got, but difficult ground and dense are what matters. For your forest typically. One of the kind of like alpha units in my army is the Leviathan, right? So he deploys typically, depending on what's going on, but in this matchup he's probably deploying about here. So he's got to go back to about here. Something like that, okay? Now obviously the Leviathan has smoke screen, so you can pop smoke on him. But and this wouldn't really apply to Mark's army. But there are a lot of armies out there that get like prescience like powers or +1 to hit somehow. And something I've thought about is just making sure the first turn my Leviathan, he doesn't need to go his 8. He can just take the penalty and go 6 here, right? So he's -1. And obviously with like against Mark, I'm actually probably going to be doing. Actually no, because Warp Talons fly, so it doesn't matter. But if Mark was running the... Because you've got 2 squads of 5 Terminators, right?
Nope, 1 big squad of 10.
Oh, it is 1 big squad of 10. Okay. All right, so in that case, I having played Mark a few times, and hearing his battle report stuff, I kind of know what to expect from him.
Sorry, I'm making that up. I now have changed this list. It is right now 2 squads of 5. You are correct.
Okay, so I'll just start the whole damn thing again. So
0 points for me.
Yeah,
it's yours to win.
Yeah. Okay. So if that was a large combat threat of infantry or of a ground-based unit that didn't have fly, my Leviathan is going here, just to make a first-turn charge that much more difficult, because you're most certainly going to have to touch the difficult ground.
Yep.
If you shoot me and you have something, a way to give +1, like literally every army except Chaos Space Marine, except World Eaters. Actually, no, our prayer, we do have a prayer for that, so we can do it.
Oh, that's true. We can get +1 to hit in the shooting phase. We take it all the time.
All right. I had a phase. I had a dalliance with it. But you take +1 to hit against me. Okay, I can negate the dents. Okay, but I'm still -1 because of the smoke screen, if I choose to. -2 obviously doesn't exist anymore in the way that it used to in 8th edition. For anyone who's new, you could, in some situations, get units up to -4, -5, and actually be untargetable for a brief period of the game, and it was oppressive and not fun. Now, your negative and positive modifiers to hit and wound stop at -1 or +1, but if I'm -1 and Mark gets +1, we're back to normal. So if I can stack a second -1, I actually go back to being -1. So it's a very niche case, but my Leviathan, he moves 8. He's not a slow boy. So with the -2, he's still got a 6-inch move. He's still a Marine, sort of like he's still going to get where he needs to be. And because he's so tough, a lot of players, I feel, when they see a Leviathan Dreadnought in dense cover, and he's probably the only realistic target, they may overcommit resources, because my Leviathan typically is either just going to get lucky and tank everything, or he's just there to absorb firepower. So if I can at least get my opponent to spend 3 or 4 CP or over, badly position their units, then you trade what you can. So for me, the forest here is a defensive position to stymie your charges, negate your shooting, and whilst it's nowhere near as good as your obstacle containers here, which I think is a very, very good position, I think it's something. It's better than it just being, no, I've ruined it.
Oh, you did it again.
I fixed it. I'm not going to unlock the trees, but my only other alternative was probably sticking them over here somewhere where they just don't really interact with the game at all. So,
I will tell you, now that you've gone through that, I honestly think this forest for your army is better than this container for my army.
Really? How's that?
Because a couple reasons. One, as I was talking about how this blocks line of sight for you shooting from this corner to this side, it blocks line of sight for me shooting from this corner to this side also.
Yes.
Your Leviathan, once it's in the forest, does not care that there's a forest there.
Yes.
Everything of mine that wants to shoot into the middle of this objective here, for example, has to fire through this forest.
Yeah.
So it's a problem to shoot through there. My forest, I usually like putting it in a spot where it can cause havoc for my opponent's shooting. Another thing that's super fun to remember with dense terrain is if I were one of those, horrible fishy people, and I had something back here, or Tyranids, or whomever else, even Imperial Guard, something back here that wants to fire at your Leviathan with indirect fire, this forest is still in the way.
Yes.
So it still gets a -1 on top of the -1 to its ballistic skill.
Yeah.
If I'm over here.
Hold on one sec. Let me just clarify. Because just for anyone who was not aware, the change to indirect fire, it changes... Is that the one that changes your ballistic skill?
Correct. It's not a -1 modifier to hit. It actually reduces your ballistic skill by 1.
Yeah. So then that's a weird situation where you actually do basically get -2 to hit. So...
Yep. And good for it, those sneaky little cowards.
Yeah, sorry.
But if I was back here trying to shoot indirect fire at your disciples who are cleverly holding that objective, that forest still in the way. I can't see that forest, so how it impacts my ability to hit your disciples, I don't know. But no one ever said that they made good rules, just that they make rules. So this is, I'll give you 0.5 point.
Okay, all right. I'll take it.
Which means you win 1/2 to 0.
Yes, victory is mine. But yeah.
Until the first turn die roll goes.
Yeah, right. Oh, God.
And then all of a sudden, my containers look really smart.
But no, that's a really good way to learn. I do recommend anyone who's watching this, anyone who's thinking about going to tournaments or even playing friendly or locally with player optimized terrain, try and find someone who's used it before. To kind of sit down and go through it with you. Watching other people do it, I've watched some bat reps and stuff like that, and watched some kind of very basic guides online. And one of the reasons I wanted to do this video, Mark reached out to me and wanted to discuss this, and I said, can we record this, because there aren't that many resources online. But nothing beats going over it in person. Nothing beats playing a game with player optimized terrain in this situation. So I do recommend anyone out there who's going to have to use this, try and get some games in with it, because even with a basic understanding of it right now, it's still pretty terrifying. It's still, like you say, it's that mini game, it's that game within a game, and I'm already, we're already worried about playing the actual event. I want to get my models on the table. I don't want to feel like I've already lost the game before I deploy.
100%.
And it's definitely it's interesting. And like I said, I don't want to get too much into it, because terrain has been an issue realistically through all of 40k. I don't know, you may know better, Mark, but I don't feel like there's ever been a point in any edition where maybe terrain was okay, but there were other aspects of the game which needed improving, which, were they improved, would have meant terrain wasn't okay. And I don't know.
I think there was only one time that I would call a pretty sweet spot for terrain, and that was way back in 3.5 edition. There were two things that made terrain, I think, work then for me. One was your ruins were on a base, and if you had to shoot through the ruin, you couldn't. If you needed to shoot into the ruin and there were windows, you could. Okay. If there was a forest in the way, you couldn't shoot through it. If you were in the forest, you could shoot out of it, or you could shoot into it. It was very simple. It led to some goofy things, but it was very clear whether or not cover had an effect or not. The other thing that made that work was when you had an armor save value and weapons had an AP value, and you either got your save or you did not.
Right.
So it made cool things happen. Like Space Marines were just like, I'm not going into a building. I don't need to. My armor is better than that building. And they would just literally tromp down the middle of the field, because if you shot a lasgun at a Space Marine, it didn't matter if he was in cover or not.
Right.
He was getting a 3-up save.
Okay.
So now they have made being in cover super important, and that makes the rules for cover super important, and how people apply those rules super important. Like these buildings that have entirely blocked off walls is great for anybody that doesn't need line of sight.
Yes.
We use them to launch our assaults into your armies. I know we were talking earlier, like sometimes I have been tempted to take a ruin and literally spin it around so that there was no way my opponent could come onto my objective without me getting to shoot at him, because they would have to go into the ruin and I could shoot through this window at them. There's just all kinds of stuff that the terrain rules have changed. So I would agree, there's not many times that the terrain rules have been fantastic, but they definitely have some concerns now.
Yeah, it's one of the biggest parts of the game, I feel like, short of codex differentials or variance between codexes, which is just an entirely different thing. I think of all the mechanical aspects of the core rules, basically, And I'm not going to mention Lasgun's auto wounding on 6s because I know that someone gets very upset with that. But in general, that's an army specific thing. In general, the rules are pretty good. Maybe a bit oversimplified in some areas, maybe a bit overly complex in others. I just feel terrain for me is both. It's overly simple and overly complex. The amount of time it took me to understand what obscuring and dense was is ridiculous.
Well, it doesn't help that they use obscuring for something that, obscuring means it's hard to see you, not impossible.
Yes.
And dense might mean you can't see someone.
Yes.
But that's the one that means it's hard to see you.
Yeah.
Because
English Games Workshop's command of the English language is incredibly embarrassing. But yeah, I think it's one part of the game which needs professionals to work on it. And I hate to say that, I don't want to disrespect the rules team because they do, for the most part, do a wonderful job. I just think terrain is very much a work in progress, and I'd really like to see more progress on it, because it's like the old cliche when someone's talking about a movie, how the city was a character in itself. The terrain is an army in itself. You are oftentimes fighting against or with, as it allies with you, the terrain. If you get a favourable matchup, as fast, reasonably fast combat army players, if we were to get terrain, with lots of nice line of sight blocking things that can really stymie our opponent's shooting and allow us launching pads and places to launch ambushes from, that could really be the difference in us winning or losing a game.
Correct. Alternatively, if we walk into Deathwing and they've got heavy cover on buildings, well, we might as well just swing pool noodles at them.
Yes. Before we started recording, I made a comment about there being no heavy cover in the new FLG event packs, which I understand. But I do kind of want it. I know you don't, and I fully understand why, and it's perfectly reasonable and logical and sensible, but I don't care, because I just want my 10 Red Butchers to get into heavy cover with Armour of Contempt, with -1 to hit on them, and I want them to set to defend, Mark, and I want it to be an Imperial army that charges me, Mark, and I want to have a 0-up save, and I want to explode on 5s, and I want Khorne there for the rerolls. I just want it to happen. I just want it to happen. I want a squad of 10 Red Butchers to be on a streamed game at the ACO, and everyone watching is like, what just happened? How did this happen?
So the one place I could see that's still happening on the FLG terrain is in the orc table. The building in the center of the table has heavy cover, and they may not have removed it. So worth a look when we get our final packets. But the other thing I would say that you've hit the nail on the head with, and I think one of the parts about it that makes it difficult to understand terrain is the terrain is like the one thing Games Workshop can't. The execution of the terrain is the one thing Games Workshop can't force to happen the way they want it to, because people are going to build terrain the way they choose to build terrain. Mm-hmm. You may throw down a latex mat that says this is a forest. Well, there's no definition of the shape of a forest, or how big it should be, how small it should be, whether it actually needs to have 1 tree on it or 17 trees on it. Yeah. And forests are breachable. So you can only move a vehicle through a forest, like your Leviathan can only go through that forest if there's not a tree in the way. You can't move the tree, because that would be like moving the wall on a building. So if you have just a piece of MDF board and call that your forest, then forests are mildly annoying for vehicles.
Right.
If there are trees on it that are stuck to the base, all of a sudden your Leviathan runs into that forest and goes bonk off of a tree and can't move anymore because it can't walk through the tree.
Yeah.
But they can't control that. So they may have intent, and I think that's part of the area where you're absolutely correct, that they need to be more clear of their intentions for what a ruin is, for what a forest is, and what sizes are recommended for those pieces of terrain. Because I've seen people put like a 2x4 cathedral in the center of the table, which as soon as you touch into that terrain, you can see the entire board because for whatever reason, there are no internal walls in any buildings in the 40k universe.
It's strange,
but the other side of it is make sure you take advantage of every opportunity you have when you head into a tournament to find out what the tournament rules are for the terrain in that tournament. I love that FLG puts out their guide ahead of time so you know, and you can kind of get an idea of what your terrain is going to look like, so you don't have questions about whether forests are obscuring or not, for example. But those are important things to have a conversation with your TOs and your opponents about.
Yeah. Well, that's the golden rule there, isn't it? It comes down to make sure you are having those conversations with your TO, with your opponents. If there's a community for the particular tournament you're going to, whether it's a Facebook page or a Discord, be active in it and make sure those conversations are being had, because exactly like Mark just said there are these weird interactions, there are strange things that happen with terrain, and I did just check, there is heavy cover on the Central Walk piece, at least according to the BAO document. So whether that's intentional or not, I don't know, but maybe it's not intentional. Maybe FLG just missed that one. We don't know, which was why, I would make sure and probably will ask about that, because that'd be nice to know, because that might be the dream, Mark. That might be where it happens.
I'm telling you, you got to watch out for those things. And please do, when you have those conversations, be polite. I know. Yes. I'll take one on my own self. When I read the terrain rules for the Lone Star Open last year, and they had put heavy cover on every single building, I literally changed my entire list because I'm like, you've just killed close combat armies, and that was before Armor of Contempt. Yes. Now, AP2 weapons are AP0 weapons going into an opponent in heavy cover if they're Space Marines. So it's oof. But but be polite. Don't, by all means, have the conversation, express your concerns in a polite way. But at the end of the day, remember, these people aren't making, Elon Musk money to play a game with toy soldiers that you're supposed to have fun at. So be nice.
Exactly, yeah. That is it. Always, I want everyone to make sure you're respecting and paying, pay your respects to people, especially people organising tournaments, because, if they are making money, it's not a hell of a lot. Please be nice. That's very important. Ask questions, but be nice about them. But I think pretty much on that note, keeping an open line of dialogue and communication is always important. I think that kind of wraps it up. Hopefully, this little demonstration and discussion has given you, the player, a little bit more information and knowledge on player optimized terrain, player placed terrain, whatever you want to call it, and just gives you a little bit of information going forwards, gives you an extra arrow in your quiver, I guess we can say. But I appreciate you, Mark, for coming on and helping me through with this and giving your guidance and sage wisdom and, frustrated anger as well, I think.
They all come together at once.
But okay, everyone. Thanks for watching. Thanks for tuning in. And until next time, stay healthy, stay safe, and kill, maim, burn.